You have your coffee. I have my coffee. Good morning, truth seekers. Back here in the game with Deb Mangelus. It's so great to do this. This is really exciting. I've been really excited after last week because we got into some really good disagreement, which is fun. And I really think that like different people have different values, but I really believe that we can find the common ground. We can, find to that place where values might differ, um, and find mutual respect. And so let this be like a microcosm of the bigger political scene. Yes, 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 yes. Great. So we need each other to see the whole picture. Yeah. All right. So what do we? So do we want to start with the kids in Parkland? Do we want to start with the immigration we talked about, or climate change? These are three hot button issues that seem to come up. All right. That sounds good. Yeah. Yeah. Good plan. Where do you want to start? Right. Okay. Okay. Right. She said that we shouldn't listen to the kids. Is that what she's saying? Okay. I know. Yeah. You know what I'm just realizing is we don't have sound on you because stuff. That kind of sucks. So let me fix that. Yeah, I know. Yeah,
Be pinned down and recorded to say while you're
exactly.
getting the
Now we
sound
have
back.
your audio, so that's good.
Now
So
you can hear me. Hello, truth seekers.
sorry
well,
about that.
we're discussing the what's going on with these kids. It's a deeper issue. I'm wondering if with that whole blossoming of the Me Too movement and awareness of the oppression of women. I wonder if now it's not about the oppression of children that's up on the scene in a way.
Okay. You think
And
that these kids are being oppressed? Is that what you're saying?
well, I think they're being oppressed by the fact that somebody could walk into their school with a gun and shoot 17 of their closest friends, and that's kind of oppressive. I
Right, but
mean,
I mean that it's not just because they're kids that this could happen. This could happen. It happened, San Bernardino in a workplace. It could happen to anyone. So that and by that metric, we're all oppressed.
yes, well, we're all afraid, and I think fear is the creator of oppression. But it's hard to, my background working in high risk adolescent psych and high risk pediatrics and high risk labor and delivery as a nurse.
Hmm.
I saw the effect of the disrespect that happens to kids. I mean, these kids, the people who hurt them were very creative and deliberate and
Who are we talking
horrible.
about now?
The kids that were
Oh,
hurt
the
that
in
I
the
took care of in adolescent psych.
got
I
it.
saw it from child abuse and kids coming in pediatrics. I saw kids who got raped by their stepfather in at 14 years old having a baby. I mean, this is sort of this weird undercurrent. And now that I look back at it, I'm thinking we took care of those people,
Right,
but where was the next step to prosecution? If
right.
if I knew this kid had been raped by her stepfather,
Stopping the
She
problem.
was
Yeah.
in here having a baby.
Right.
There's just this numb kind of cloud over us that we're
Right.
finally, I think, starting to wake up from.
I
So
had an experience back in 2010 where I attended this it was like a training for some like intuitive energy work healing kind of thing, which is where I met Nomi. Actually, we met at that training.
oh,
And and all of a sudden there were all these women there who had been sexually abused by various people in various circumstances, various ways, and how kind of like it was finally dawned on me how widespread this is, right? And how difficult it actually is to prosecute because, well, someone in the police force is has the same tendencies and is protecting this other person, and they know each other, and they're just like it's just, and you have to have such strong proof, and there's all this like repression, so you don't like if it happens when you're a kid, you might even not even really realize that it's happening, and there's all that stuff, which makes it very, very, very tricky. So
yeah. And, I've been thinking more deeply into this because I'm thinking the same people who are saying these kids shouldn't have a voice, these kids who are the victims shouldn't have a voice, they're children, adults make the laws. Well, adults also make the abuse. So I'm thinking us telling these kids they don't have a right to speak out about the trauma that they sustained and weigh in on how that's going to change are the same. It's from the same climate of silence
right,
that the kid just made it up. Like little kids don't make up sexual abuse. That's
right,
not what they come in
no,
equipped to.
right,
So they're like, oh, the child is telling a lie? Really? Why would the child make up that particular lie? I mean, you have
yeah.
to sort of.
I agree. That's weird. So here's where I'm coming from with the kids is absolutely they have a right to speak up. We have free speech in this country. There's not a question about that. But that doesn't mean that they're experts on what the solution is necessarily. They went
Right.
through an experience. They're experts on what that feels like to be a part of
Exactly.
a scene
Exactly.
of a mass shooting. They know that intimately, but they're not necessarily experts on the solution on and how to
No.
do this. No, that's I mean
They're
that's
experts on recognizing that there is no solution.
well.
That's what they're experts at.
Well, yeah, we don't have a solution at the moment. Of course, a solution exists, and yeah, it's not solved at the moment, and we need to solve it for sure. What I saw, like I watched that CNN town hall, that was just horrible, and
Oh,
that
you
was
told me about
all.
that.
That
That's
was
not.
the whole premise was like, oh, the kids are correct and the adults are wrong, and we need to listen to the kids, and if only the kids, like adults couldn't vote but only kids could vote, then we would be good and all that stuff. I think that's nonsense. I think that's
Well, that's
nonsense.
the opposite side of the spectrum where we go from our children have no say, no power, children should be seen and not heard, and we can beat the crap out of them and shove them in the closet anytime we want, to the kids are the right ones and we're their friends. And, there
Yeah,
is a proper balance. Those,
exactly.
if you have a
We need to
little,
be adults. We need to be parents.
yeah, if you have a child, a toddler, who is learning how to walk and you take them out into a big green yard, well, they can go anywhere in that yard until they get near the edge of the property, till they get near the road. Then I as the adult, I'm supposed to allow them free reign within their capacity to have free reign, and be the one who stands at the boundary and guides them back away from the danger, away
Yep.
from the road. And
Yep.
that's where I really feel like we went from beating our children, martial punishment as the norm. Like, I remember my neighbor's kid having a gigantic ear. She would just drag him around by his ear, like it was a natural course to be physically unkind in those settings. And then we went to hitting your child is a criminal offense and you're a child abuser if you hit your kid.
Right.
All these people who were raised, I was raised getting hit,
Right.
that's just what you did. My mother thought I was the most abusive person in the world when I put my 6-year-old son in timeout. My mother, who cracked me as, whenever she felt like, but she didn't do it she didn't just walk in the room and start to beat me up. If I did something, she smacked me.
Right.
And she said to me, "Why are you torturing this child and locking him in the room, treating him like a dog?" Like it's all about perspective, right? In her mind, you take your back of your hand, give him a good crack across the butt, and you won't do that again.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a proponent of anything, but you cannot take away one fashion of discipline or one concept and then not give anything back.
Right.
So then the adults become the ones who are under scrutiny, and if they hit their child or treat their child a certain way, they're going to fall under the realm of perpetrator, and then they're going to be in trouble. So now we're all friends with our kids, and we say no, and these kids are so smart. They come up with these great ways. All right. Like there's no boundaries, and there's this wishy-washy adult thing. So what I'm seeing in the circumstance seems to be this, either the kids are all right and the adults are bad and wrong, or the adults are all right and the kids just should shut up and not be heard.
Right.
And I'm thinking,
that's
those
neither
kids
of those are
weigh
very good.
in. These kids, God bless their souls, are bringing this to light in a way that is not
right. I remember for me as a kid, it was like there was always that sense that, well, I'm a kid, so therefore I don't matter. And it took me until I was about 40 to realize, oh wait, I'm not a kid anymore. I might actually start to matter a little bit.
Might start to matter now.
Yeah, so I'm totally with you. Like, kids matter, and they need to know that they matter, but they also need to know who's the adult here, who's the parent, right? Until they're old enough to take care of themselves.
Yeah, and kids don't feel safe. There's this myth that, they don't feel safe if we give them boundaries.
Oh, no,
but they don't,
opposite.
They don't feel safe if we don't give them boundaries. Totally. My children I adopted when they were 3 and 6. And one of my little boys was very, they both came from hell, but, they had been taken out of a brutally abusive and terrifying situation. And they got to my house where there was food in the pantry and a bed to sleep in and people to love them who wanted to talk to them and play with them. And, my 6-year-old didn't automatically jump into, hooray, I've reached nirvana. Like when the environment didn't obviously show him where the danger was, he just pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed until he was going to find where my nasty point was.
Right.
Because that was 100% of his experience. So, these kids are learning what they're taught, and
so so in my experience with my kids, so growing up, we didn't have healthy boundaries in my family at all. We didn't know what that was, right? So everyone was living in like a constant state of boundary violation of some sort, and then there was like, people feeling hurt and passive aggressive or lashing out or like whatever happens in that situation, right? And it took me a while to learn this for myself. But what I found was that when I didn't know how to maintain boundaries with anyone, but particularly with my kids, what would happen was that I would say no, but I would say no from a place of like, oh, please no, or like it wasn't a very powerful, it wasn't a very confident no,
right.
And it wouldn't really work, right? And then it would escalate to the point where I was like yelling at my kids and like being really really angry, right? And now it's just no. It doesn't take any effort because I just know that that's a no and I feel good about it. I know that I have the right to say there's no, even though I don't need to argue about it. It's a no for me. I'm the parent here. This is how it works. And it never escalates to anything, right? And that's, I think that's the like it's when you figure out how to have healthy boundaries with yourself, then saying yes or no to a kid becomes easy. You don't have to be friends or acquiesce or any of that stuff, right? And it doesn't have to escalate into drama.
Yeah, well, when you tell the truth, like saying no, please, that's not really the truth. That's me pleading with you because I have this agenda that I want you to do something so that I don't have to be engaged with this anymore. And then you go from that to frustration with the kid for not responding. And then all of a sudden you're screaming at them because you've now reached your break point.
Right.
And that's what I was saying about my son. He didn't come in there thinking, oh, yay, look, I can read the cues of this environment. It's all wonderful. He came in there like, okay, there is no obvious danger here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to find it
Mm-hmm.
because my job now, his job was to survive.
Mm-hmm.
So
I need to
he
know where the
pushed him.
boundaries are.
Yeah, there was all this food, and he cut the bread in half and folded it up inside the napkin and put it in his pocket,
Right.
like for later.
I remember hearing that. So like, a mistake that I see a lot of parents do is this, like, you say no, but you also want the kid to be happy with the no, right? You don't want the kid to be upset, which is
Yes.
like, then who's the authority here, right? The kid is the authority all of a sudden, which is upside down. So you have to be able to say no and be like, don't mind that the kid is upset.
And you've
And
got to come from a place of knowing that you said no for a bigger reason that the kid is unaware of,
exactly. Yes,
right?
that's so
And
right.
that you're saying no because you are being honorable and your years and experience on the planet have showed you that no, Joey, eating a pound of chocolate is not the kid wants in the candy store. He wants a whole pound of chocolate. His eyes light
Right,
up. He wants all of that.
right,
I want to eat the whole I want to eat the whole pound. I want to eat the whole pound. And if I'm like, no, no, no. Oh, all right. And then Joey ends up sick
right.
because he ate a pound of chocolate. That's my responsibility.
Exactly. Or
You know,
even not even if it's like, oh, all right, but I feel like shit inside because I agreed
you
to
gave in.
something, and yeah, and then the relationship just turns like you don't have a good time, right? That's my responsibility as well to make sure I don't end up in that situation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Um,
It's all about energy, right? That's what I think.
Exactly. And they feel the energy. They know the energy
Yeah.
exactly. And I remember like this whole thing about, like, I was so bad at this like originally, but like with boundaries, and we would never set any boundaries for our kids in the early years because we didn't know better. And it was like we kept hearing about, like, well, kids need boundaries and stuff, and it wasn't until we talked to this um, um, author in Denmark who wrote about this stuff, and what he said was like, it's not about setting boundaries, it's about the kids knowing your boundaries. Like, they don't need
Yes.
to be the same every day, that necessarily. It's just
Right.
that they can feel you. Where are you? Where are your boundaries today? It's fine that you're in a, like, something's going on, you're in a bad mood one day and you're not the other day. If you're honest about it, if you're
On
clear
it.
about it, they can feel you. They
Right.
get that.
Right. And the kids, whether or not we're setting clear boundaries and attending to our own boundaries, the kids are constantly tuning into our boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Because, people are like, oh, my adolescent, people used to think I was crazy. You want to work with adolescents? Adolescents in psych? I'm like, yeah, I totally trust those kids because they might be reactive, but they're not malicious. It's not malicious. Like,
Right.
oh, my adolescent is acting out. Well, that's what an adolescent is supposed to do.
Right. It's their job. Yeah.
And they're supposed to, an adolescent isn't choosing some free idea about how they're going to proceed. When you're little, you want to please mommy and daddy. And when you're an adolescent, you want to say, mommy said black, I say white, hands down. I choose the opposite of my parent. It's a natural sort of a progression of autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
But the child still needs the parent to hold the opposite position so they can take the opposite position of
That's a
them. You
good
know what I mean?
point.
So the
Yeah.
parent becomes integral, even though the parent's like, my child is rejecting me. No, your child is totally focused on you.
Right.
And while you're saying, no, I don't think it's okay to go smoke pot in the park with your friends after school. And
Do it during school, basically, was what you're
during
saying. Right?
well, now
Yeah,
God
that's
knows what's
better.
good. That's the other thing about school. Like when I have a friend who teaches ROTC up in upstate New York, and
What is the
she's like,
ROTC?
all right, that's the training, like the high school level training for the military.
Okay.
She was in the military for years. She was a chief master sergeant in the Air National Guard. And now she's teaching in the schools. They're sort of recruiting kids, and they go through the whole process of sort of like a mini military, like what it's like. They have parades, and there's a lot of really lost children up there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of really lost children everywhere. They've lost their parenting. So Anyway, these kids, she's like, oh yeah, the kids, we were in class and the kids were hanging out in the hallway. And I was like, the kids were in the hallway while you were in class? Why? She said, oh, because they didn't want to be in their classes anymore, so they walked out of their classes. And I was like,
What?
yeah, that was so far from anything I could compute
Right.
because not that I'm a big fan of everyone has to sit in a little row and look the same and be the same. I'm more of a Montessori
Mm-hmm.
fan. But there's a certain social decorum that you learn by going to school.
Mm-hmm.
And these kids, they don't want to hear that. They just get up and walk out of the class. And there's no consequence for that.
That's
And
nuts.
if there's a consequence, they're like, oh, you're going to suspend me? Cool. A week
Yeah.
off school.
Right.
It's a whole different, and I believe that breakdown, those children were raised by adults.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not blaming adults. Adults, that's the other thing
But they're
I
not raised by healthy adults.
no, because they were children themselves who were not raised in a
Exactly.
healthy way.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
if I was raised getting beat up, I have a lot of clients. I talk to them about sort of projection with their kids, that these kids, I was raised and my mother beat me, so I'm never going to ever do that to my child.
Mm-hmm.
So it's completely projective, that not that you should beat your child, but
Right.
beating and discipline and, boundary setting all sort of falls into the same package.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was the same way. Right. I felt like my dad was very abusive, and I was like, I'm never gonna be a dad like that. So I turned into like completely meek dad, but ended up with so many of the same patterns because then I would constantly let my boundaries be violated, and then I would have these bursts of anger.
Yeah,
And that was basically what my dad did, So I
exactly.
tried so hard not to copy it and ended up doing the same, right?
Yeah, well, you had an empathic moment with your dad, which puts you in the position, I like to tell people all the time, what's your dad's name? Because that guy was just a guy and you didn't come with a manual. You know what I mean? Like he did the best he could. That doesn't
Totally.
mean his opinion or his behavior was the standard and you somehow had to fit into that. It's a very deep, complex social issue that we're dealing with right now. And
Right.
to me, it's not about guns. I hear you. And, to me, it's not about guns. It's about a standard of being. Like, not to blame anybody, but where does a mother go? A single mother who has a teenage son who's spending all that time in his room looking at, you know, gun porn or whatever they're doing in there. Like, she has no ability. See the kitty? Hi, kitty.
Hey, kitty.
Um, she has no ability to go into that room and dissemble that or say, you're not going to spend all that time in this room anymore. You know what I mean? There's no way to interfere with it. Like, who does that mother call to tell that her child is behaving in a way that does not feel healthy and does not feel safe? Like, who does she tell?
I don't know. Wasn't there like the FBI if it was called 20 something time or the police or whatever? I mean, there's a lot of people alerted in this case, right?
Yeah, so all those people who got alerted, which one of them went and sat down with that mother
Right.
and said, "What do you see?" I had
Right. Yeah, that's a huge problem.
yeah, when
But
I
even
worked,
even also just like the community, right? The neighbors or like I know that that's not the reality that we live in, but it saddens me that there's not a bit more of a sense of community around
yes,
how we
the
live that we
extended
can.
family, that takes a village to raise a child.
Right.
So if it takes a village to raise a child, then, and we don't know our neighbor's name,
Mm-hmm.
then where's the village? Like, is
Right.
it the family? Like, do we have to travel to the village? Like,
We're
what's
basically
the
scared of each other, right? Like if someone comes knocking on the door and like it was like, whoa, shit, what's going on?
I know you expect like who is it knocking at my door, and
Yeah.
we're scared. But well, that's the whole layer over of fear,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
know. And once we like, I thought a lot about what you said. If I could be the queen of the world, and I was imposing all of these things, and people had to go to school and get a license to become a parent, and I don't think that's such a bad idea. But I wonder why we don't incorporate things I feel like the old person who's like, when I was a kid. But, when I was a kid, we had home ec in school. And they taught us about checkbooks and cooking and
Hmm.
how to sew clothing. And it was called home economics.
Right. And
And
what
they
was it
taught
called?
us.
Economics. Was
Huh?
it? Why was it called? Because it was literally about like about checkbooks and economics, and the cooking was like a part of it, or
Well, it was about they called it home ec
right,
because that was the way it was called. But it was about the whole sort of domestic scene and how that functions.
right.
So, I remember from the time I
I
was
think
in
that's a good
first,
idea. I mean,
it's a great, well, we eradicated it.
we had
Like,
something slightly similar, but it only focused like we learned cooking in school. We had cooking classes in school,
yeah,
right?
my son took cooking classes. He came home and whipped really great food up for us. I was
Right.
pretty impressed.
Yeah. Was that
Yeah.
is that
So,
mandatory for your kid, or is that some extra that he
no,
did?
it's something that he took because culinary was something that really
Got it.
interested him. But when I was a
For
kid,
for yeah, for me as a kid, it was
it was
everybody
part
had
of the
it.
curriculum.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we all learned that. And then they took it out, and then they took out a lot of things and these kids, my youngest son, so excited about writing a check for the first time. We might be like, oh, thank God it's online now, so I don't have to sit and write checks.
Yeah.
But, it's that newness, like a kid learning to tie their shoes for the first time. Like,
Right.
we need to build in life skills for our kids.
I
If
completely agree. Yeah.
if the parents aren't going to, or are incapable, and I'm not blaming parents, they are unsupported too.
Right.
Like, we went from turning the
I
TV
mean,
on
but
with our
it's like
finger.
all the home econ stuff that you talked about, like balancing a checkbook and managing your finances and like what are we gonna eat this like week and all those things, and also like
Yeah, meal
thoughts
planning,
and
nutrition.
feelings and like how do you deal with it? One of my teammates recently talked about this book, like how to listen so your kid will talk, and how to talk so your kid will listen. That kind of like, they're basic things that we just don't learn, right? And so I don't know necessarily that public schools needs to do this, but we really need that kind of training out there.
Well, we had it. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
We had two classes. I think that they have health class now. I've heard
yeah.
people
Health
say.
is another huge thing, right?
Well,
Learning
I'm
to
thinking, they kind of intersected for me because home ec, we didn't have a separate health class. Health
right.
was built into the home ec class because it was about nutrition.
It's
It
kind of
was
nuts
about
that we don't
cooking, how
learn
to feed
anything
your
about
family,
how to
like
manage life when we're
how to manage life because we
right. Yeah,
teach them, you know, calculus. Like,
right.
when do they use that again unless they're going to be a rocket scientist or something? You know what I mean? But we don't teach them how to balance a checkbook. When I remember being in first grade, and one of the most profound memories, of school was every week on Friday, or every week, maybe it was on Monday, we brought $1 into school with our little passbook savings that they had us start a savings account.
Wow.
And every week we brought in $1, which I'm really dating myself, right? And somehow magically, we didn't know how, the money got deposited into a bank, and our teacher gave us our bank books back on Wednesday or Tuesday, and it was a thing. You know what I mean? It was built in. Saving money was built in as a part of how school functioned.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I thought it was amazing, and it sort of completely went away
Hmm.
because we've gotten overly detailed and critical about minutia, and we've let go of the bigger concepts.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking kids are just really confused today. They're just really confused, and
And grown-ups too.
well, the grown-ups are. That's where I feel like we're, if we have adults and children, then we have a schism. But if we have adults who were once children raised in that same paradigm, or the complete opposite paradigm that their kids are being raised in now, who taught those people how to be boundaried and healthy and lovingly disciplining? We hear the word discipline, and like when I was a kid, if I heard the word discipline, I was terrified because that meant something that
Me
was
too.
I
Yeah.
did not want to be. So I disciplined myself. Was that healthy? Probably not 100%, because I couldn't take risks that were evident and sort of be supported through them. If I did the wrong thing, I got hell. And if I did the right thing, it wasn't made a big deal out of. It was baseline norm. So there was very little you could do to excel. But excelling in my day used to be a homogenous group, and one person rises up above the homogenous group and becomes the identified important person. Whereas, that's why I like that whole Montessori concept of, these are individual people who have individual learning styles and individual interests.
Right.
And they need to be educated according to those interests and according to their personal.
So you said a couple of things before that I found interesting. Like, I love the what you said about the adolescents, and like their job is to basically take the opposite position of the parent, and your job, like, you don't feel rejected. This is just them doing their job. You just hold your position. You let them do that. That sounds exactly like politics to me. Like how that's being played out right now, right? That's exactly what it seems like the Democrats and the Republicans are doing, or the left and the right, or whatever you call it. And also, we were talking about boundaries, and I figured that was a good way to lead into immigration talk.
Oh, boundaries, actual physical boundaries.
Because, like, so where I'm coming from on immigration, it's like, so we talked last week about DACA. DACA kids came up, right? And where I'm at is like, I just don't know enough to know what the right thing to do on that issue is. But here's where I'm coming from, which is any country has the right to maintain its boundaries and say who gets to come in and who doesn't get to come in.
Yes.
Just like I have that right with my home, I have that right with my body. What do I put into it? All that stuff. That's the fundamental right that we have. We have the right to determine who gets in and who doesn't get in. And so in this case, what seems to happen is that some people, moved to this country without following the rules for who gets to live here or not. They came here illegally, and for some reason we're not allowed to call people like that illegal immigrants. I don't understand why. You
have my full permission to call them illegal immigrants, because that's a pretty direct.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that they're as human beings are illegal.
They're not criminals. They're just not legally in the country. So that's just a fact.
Exactly. And then they chose to have children, and whose lives then are obviously in jeopardy too, because they were not. Well, I guess they weren't born here. The children, obviously.
No, they brought them here as infants.
Right. So, because if they had been born here, they would have been citizens, which is also like a little bit a weird.
Well, that's
rule.
Bill. I've been reading the Constitution now, so I think that all of this horrible stuff that's going on has inspired me to actually read the document that governs our entire legal system and judicial system and government, and it's really interesting to go back and read it. And I'm reading the Constitution as it was put forth, the original document, and as I'm reading it, I'm going, but we don't do that anymore. So there's the amendment and the amendment and all of these amendments. So, and it's all interpretable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I was reading the 14th Amendment, which addresses the sort of citizens' rights. Like, it says, if you are born or naturalized here, my mind started to go to.
Naturalized means that you've achieved citizenship, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So you become a citizen. And then my mind started to go to where we, what do they call it? Statute of limitations. Like, why don't they could just very easily make a law that naturalization for a child born to an immigrant family happens at 7 years old, or you know what I mean? Like, you could just make a law that if they've been here for all those years and were children, minors,
Of course, I mean we can make, yeah, of course we can make that. We can make that law. So no,
Well, we
so
can't.
huh?
Well,
You no. Well, it's possible. So where I'm coming from is like these parents brought their kids here knowing full well that they were living in this country illegally and they were
right,
putting their children's futures in jeopardy. That's on the parents that they chose to do that.
right,
Right. And so what the way I look at it is like we allowed our boundaries to be violated without enforcing them
right.
years ago. And now we have to decide what are we going to do about it, right? And so one choice obviously is to say, all right, yes, we had our boundaries violated and we chose to ignore it and so many years have passed. Now it's on us. We're just going to
Yeah,
like absorb it, take it in. Um,
and
but I
start from
also but I
here.
also know in like but in my own life is someone violated my boundaries 10 years ago and like they didn't pay me what they owed or whatever, like I don't need to necessarily, like I can choose to forgive them and say all right, never mind, I'll forget it now. 10 years have passed and I haven't done anything about it and I should have brought it up, whatever. But it might not feel good and it might not be the right thing to do. And if I
Doesn't
do
feel
that, I want to
welcoming.
make sure at the same time that I don't allow this to happen again.
Yes,
So I end up in this situation one more time.
right. In my mind, in that big vast picture, it takes me back to we are all illegal immigrants, every single one of us. And the Native Americans, when I'm reading the Constitution, it's like tax all, you know, how to figure out how many representatives a state gets. Like it's very interesting. But, the non-taxed, except for the Indians,
Hmm.
whose country this is. They were here way before we ever showed up.
I know, but
We,
we stole it from them.
we stole it from them, and now we're pissed off because karma came right back around. Other
No, no.
people
I
are,
mean, it's one thing to say, like, I mean, if someone wants to invade the U.S. and successfully does it, that's life. That's how that happens, right?
we already did that. We invaded
I
this
know,
country,
I know,
and
and we
then
won. And this is that's the reality that we're in right now. I mean, we're not going to give it back to the Native Indians.
well, we're not
That's
going to
not going
give
to
it
happen.
back to them. But this whole idea of what this country stands for, the Statue of Liberty, bring me your oppressed, bring me your downtrodden, bring me the people who are oppressed everywhere else.
Right.
The, you know, it's about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Right.
This country.
But I'm with you, and I mean I think a couple of things. Like one, the world has changed a little bit since then, but also that's what we have legal immigration for, right? I spent close to a decade and at least $200,000 to get a visa to live here, and then others are just flaunting the rules and just being like, I'm just gonna like chance it, and then we have to feel sorry for them. I don't I don't get
Well,
that.
we have to have empathy for the reason a person would.
I
When I
get, yeah.
think about it, I listen to NPR, and I was listening to a talk that they did about what would happen if all of the illegal immigrants out in the bread belt out there, the breadbasket of our country, were deported.
Hmm.
All crop, 90% of the crop production would stop
Right.
because Americans for some reason don't want to do what those people want to do. The Mexican people come across they want to work. It's a
Well,
work ethic.
well,
They want to work, so they
can
come here.
okay.
They work.
So um, pause right there. So yes, and I think and we have to acknowledge the fact that there are tons of illegal immigrants here, and we're like I don't nobody's sincerely suggesting just like wholesale throwing everybody out. But I think it's important that we move to that we clarify where we stand on it, and we figure out how to get this stuff legal, so there is not this constant boundary violation, which it essentially is, right? This constant loophole of illegal immigration. On the specific issue of the corn or the crop or like, oh, but Americans don't want to do this job. Well, if it paid enough, there would be Americans who would be willing to do it. And if there are no people who are willing to do it at a very low wage because they're illegal and they don't have the rights or whatever, then if there's a demand for the crop, then the prices would go up and we would just pay more for it, but the job would still get done. So in a sense, we're you
I
know
hear you. That's a really good point. We're holding the system in place by allowing that in the injustice of paying somebody so little for work that is backbreaking
hmm
and not
and maybe we would invent better machinery so that like it can be done in a way that's not as backbreaking.
yeah, I
Would
hear
make
you.
that make sense to do that?
Yeah, I think where we're looking at is that there's the big vast perspective of conceptualizing what theoretically we can do to change a circumstance,
hmm
and then there's people.
Yeah.
Why did those people come here? Bring us
Right.
your downtrodden. Like
Right.
they came here for a better life.
Yes.
That's what America is.
And
And
I love that, and I think that's one of the main reasons that I love this country is that like people make sacrifices to come here, and they come here to make something of themselves, or at least make a living. Like they're willing to fight for this. They're willing to put in effort and put in work. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
yeah, and if you look at over time the marginalized, you know, I'm half Sicilian. The Italians weren't loved in this country when they came here. We were the criminals. We were the bad guys. We were the lowlifes.
hmm
And other people have come along now to replace us, so we get to be the good guys, you know what I mean? Or we get to be a part of and pointing our fingers at the next guy coming in. I just think there's a consciousness that this country is built on immigration,
hmm
you know.
Yeah.
And I sit and think about these things when I can't sleep at night. And I was thinking last night how we are a genetically multicultural society.
hmm
Like there isn't a soul here in this country. My grandmother and grandfather came from Sicily to the United States. My father came from Sweden.
By the way, I'm going to
Directly.
Sicily in May.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, for the first time ever. I'm
Oh,
bringing.
Sicily.
We're doing a team retreat. I'm bringing the whole team to Sicily
I'll
to hang
go.
out for a week. Yeah.
Where are you going to stay?
We found an Airbnb near Palermo, or like in the
Palermo. That's where
Palermo
my family came from.
area. Yeah.
Yeah, I did some research about that because I was raised by my little Sicilian mother,
hmm
and you know,
Is that the place for us to go, Palermo?
Palermo. Well, Palermo is more the city. Like I've never been to Sicily, so I couldn't tell you.
So we're
I know.
on the so if you Palermo's kind of on a tip ish on the side of it. So we're kind of on the other side. Over there's some beach and some stuff over there. I have no
Beautiful.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to go to Sicily.
Yeah.
But, it's supposed to be really really beautiful.
Wait, but you haven't. You have been, right? You
No,
said
I've never been.
you've never been.
I've never been, but I have family there. I have
Yeah.
family in Sweden.
You should
You
go.
know. Oh yeah, my
Yeah.
my cousin was. I'm sure he's not anymore, but he was the captain of the Viking Princess there for a while. When I was a kid, all the things we kind of missed. They're like, "Come, we'll cruise the Northern Lights," and I was like, you're a kid. The other thing I really noticed about when I'm thinking about myself. Now I've been playing with an app to try to learn Swedish because I did not know my father had a Swedish accent until I was 16. And my friend Kathy told me,
hmm
well, your father has a really thick Swedish accent sometimes. And I was like, he doesn't have an accent. Imagine that what you grow up
Yeah, totally.
hearing. Like
Yeah.
she's like, Deb, he says yellow instead of jello. Like, how could you say he doesn't have an accent? And I never heard it. But I also heard that language. It wasn't taught to me. My mother spoke Italian. My
hmm
father spoke Swedish, but the culture was we're in America now. That
hmm
whole generation of people, we're in America now. You speak English.
hmm
Like my mother wasn't taught to speak Sicilian. She picked it up because my grandparents spoke to each other in their native language, but my grandmother and my father never taught me. Like I said my prayers in Swedish when I was little,
hmm
but I had a whole language I could have
Yeah, yeah.
two other languages I could have had a rich experience of. But
I actually wanted to make my like when we had Flora and Vigo, Flora was the first one. So I looked into the whole bilingual thing, and I was like, let's make her bilingual from the start. It's
Hmm.
not, but then we got, I guess, busy with life or something. We never got to it. But it's, I mean, it's such a smart thing to do when your kid is like, that's the age where they can like really get it, right? And I'm just thinking like, if you learn two languages right from the start, that's like a dramatic skill, but like a plasticity of the brain that you can bring with you for the rest of your life. I'm
Yeah, it's
imagining.
expansive.
Yeah.
There's a there's a I think it's SJU. If you're Swedish, it's like shwoo or something like that. I can't pronounce it because if you do not learn to pronounce it by the age of 5,
Right.
you will never learn to pronounce it.
Yeah. We have
And
some things in Danish as well like that.
yeah,
Sure.
so I can't speak that language perfectly fluently
Right.
or won't be able to because I won't be able to make that sound.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, my father was a big Swedish guy with a really thick Swedish accent who spoke fluent Swedish. Obviously, he could have taught me that. And
Yeah.
he said the prayers with me. And the funny thing is, I have a feeling of those prayers.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have a feeling of how the sing song of them and the cadence of the language, but I can't remember
Right.
the prayers.
One thing I find fascinating is like how the language influences our thinking. Like I can tell that I think differently in when I think in Danish versus thinking in English. It just like enhances different aspects of my mind or cognitive ability or something like that. Right. So again,
Right.
a kid that learns a couple different languages from the beginning.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it creates
it really
neural.
shapes our language. Shapes so much. It's such a deep thing. I always used to think it was like, oh, language is kind of like arbitrary. This little like, it runs so deep in us.
Well, it's symbolic, what we don't realize. Like I always talk to people about symbols. I love symbols. Symbols are my thing. And energy, right? Reading energy, reading symbols. People are like, well, those, symbols. I'm like, you have so little knowledge of the fact that what you learned when you were writing those little letters on a piece of paper was that symbolic character carried an entire sound. And when you put it together with other symbols, like how magnificent is this computer in here, our
It's
own
insane.
minds, that we can translate those little black symbols into not only words but entire concepts
And
that
worlds.
actually lead to other concepts. Like the reason we're able to talk, I'm thrilled. You're bilingual, obviously, right? You don't.
I
I
learned
mean,
English later. I didn't start out.
yeah, but you're really good at
Do my best. Do my best.
it. But you were going to say something. I interrupted you.
No, I was just like, it's just fascinating that you can look at these little squiggly things on a piece of paper, and all of a sudden you're crying and like you're laughing and you're feeling all these things. Like it's or
Right.
even like that we can sit here and make whir sounds, and then like things happen and we like have understanding, and like it's insane when you think about it. It's really nuts. It's
Yeah.
crazy that it's possible.
Well, and it's so completely magical if you look at it.
Yeah.
And I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say before I say it. Like, that's just magnificent to me.
Hmm.
Like, how is it possible that an energetic impulse comes up in me and this brilliant computer transforms it into those little symbols and then transmits it through my voice to you, and you not only understand it, but you can respond to it with an even more deepening conceptualization of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And we're sitting around here thinking we need computers. I think that what we have is a magnificent machine right within us.
Yeah.
And, it might be able to change the whole world, but we're going to only let it do this.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Yeah, one thing that so I've been going through. I'm learning Italian, and that whole like there's this guy Gabriel who wrote a book, and he's all about like get pronunciation first, and I think
Yes.
that makes a lot of sense because then that's how you get a feel for the language, and you kind of
Well, it's the
internalize it, and you're
the
yeah,
vibration of the
and it's
language.
how kids learn too, right? So you're not overthinking and translating and all these things. But what I'm thinking also when it just to like bring politics into it again, like what the one of the pitfalls of language is that you say these things that sound good, um, and that are not actually, you're not stopping to think, is that actually true? Do I really believe in it? Like, oh, but we have to take care of, or like, I find myself oftentimes just like wanting to use phrases that I heard because they sound cool, but it's like, wait, do I really believe that? Is that actually true? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, did I just say exactly what I meant, or did I just say it because,
Yeah,
sometimes we have to use language we do not respect in order to communicate to a person
right,
who understands that language.
right.
But yeah, we get habituated into now what was it? There was a phrase that popped up the other day that was noteworthy to me. Now I notice these things come up and I'm like, what does that mean? What is the inference of that statement? Like you hear just sort of a random
Exactly, yeah.
saying, right? I had a conversation with my Dutch friends years ago. There's a game. It's called Dirty Minds or something like that. It's a game made in America. It's a little like table game, and what it is they have these cards and they give you clues, and the clues can be from an innuendo perspective, can sort of imply something off color, but it's really like the answer might be toilet paper. The way they're describing this thing is this benign answer.
Gotcha.
So I said to my Dutch friends who speak incredible English and French and Italian, and their minds think so differently because they're so expansive in that way. So we're playing this game and I'm reading the clues and I'm laughing my head off because it's funny to me. And they were like, "You think that's funny?" And they weren't being rude. They just didn't get it. And I realized how much of communication is about agreement on a level of innuendo. Like, what does this mean? So we then
Culture.
got, yeah, it's a culture. And that's what we got into this discussion. It was a really interesting discussion about why it was that my very intelligent friends who I could joke with, and, we had, we were the International Trailer Trash Chicks. We became a band. We were very funny. And we made up songs, like spoofy songs. We could laugh about those things where we had this common understanding. But in this innuendo land, they didn't understand what was so funny about that. And I couldn't understand why they didn't see it as funny.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this intrinsic thing. It wasn't something learned outright. It's the premise of learning everything else.
Right.
So then we got into a discussion about like old sayings, like where does this come from, Deborah? The raining cats and dogs. So I actually went off on a mission and went all the way back and found, it used to be that we had straw roofs and people, when it rained, the cats and dogs slipped off the roof. So they would say it was raining cats, and they had some sort of thing that was. They said it in Dutch. It sounded beautiful. And then they said it translates into like the spider crawls up the back of the chair or something. And I'm looking at them and they're like, "Don't you get it?" And I was like, no,
No.
I don't get it. If there was a spider crawling up the back of my chair, I'd be in the next room. I wouldn't kill it. I would exit. You know what I mean? Like, it's the
Spider,
literal.
this room is yours. Yeah.
It's literal. Like, I take it literally, and they understand it from I believe that's where our intuition comes from. Because you and I communicating right now is intuitive.
For a while, I was like, I lived in New York and then moved back to Denmark and lived there for about 9 years. And during that period, I didn't really want to be in Denmark. I wanted to be here in America, but I wasn't. And so I'd watch The Daily Show, I think they did 4 shows a week, Monday through Thursday. I would watch it 4 days a week, religiously over there in Denmark. And every time Jon Stewart would bring something up that was like a cultural reference to something I didn't know about, I would look it up on the internet.
Yeah.
Right? So that's how I was like, it was a very, very conscious cultural education for me. It was like,
Yes.
all right, it's like, so I learned about Sesame Street and I learned some, I don't know, some football metaphors or basketball or whatever it is, right? It's like, all right, let me learn this stuff so I can understand what they're talking about.
And that's, I wonder, with the political climate, part of what is so distasteful to me And I think that's energy. When we communicate with words, I taught my kids when they were little. I'm like, it's your tone. They're like, what do you mean, mommy, my tone? So I had the dog come over, my big old golden retriever, Sammy Einstein. And I said, watch this. Sammy doesn't speak English. He speaks love. So watch this. And so I had the dog sit in front of me. And I was like, Sammy, I love you, in a really nasty tone.
Right.
And the dog went, like, what did I do? And then I said, oh, you're the ugliest, most stupid puppy in the whole world. And he's wagging his tail. And
Right.
they're of course laughing, thinking that's the funniest thing. But I said, you see, he didn't care what I said. He cared how I said it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably the first thing that we receive from our environment as babies, infants,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And people naturally talk to a baby in quote unquote baby talk, right? There's a tone to it that communicates
Right.
awe, So the kid's reading tone, it's the formulation and the language of the words that comes later. But and that's what I feel like is so distasteful to me, because I read energy and because I read the energy of people's words. I even read the energy of words in a text. You could send me a text that says, Deb, you're the best thing since sliced bread. You're one of those little verbal
Right.
symbols, right? Because when they figured out sliced bread, it became the best thing in the world. So, you could write that in a text, but if you were doing it to manipulate me,
Yeah.
or doing it to coerce me in some way, or being divisive,
It's
I
really
read
funny
that
how that's.
straight.
I know, and these things slip in, right? You can just tell, like usually.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, again, is the
Well, I
right?
can feel it. I feel
Yeah.
it in my solar plexus. And what I noticed about myself is that if I read it over a number of times,
Mm-hmm.
I can transform my original gut experience into, oh, Calvin's complimenting me, or Calvin's my friend. But I'll originally read that tone. It comes off
Right.
energetically through
So
that
what?
symbol.
So where are you seeing that in politics? Is
Well, I feel like the tone of, part of the tone of Trump when he speaks, like making fun of people and being crude and calling people assholes. And, I don't want to think that the person who is in charge of us is a willful, rebellious adolescent who thinks he can run the world. Like, that's what I read that. And from a
I think that's what
19-year-old
we
or,
got.
well, it's what we have, but that's what is so jangling to me,
Right.
is it's what is being implied by that tone. And what is being implied by that tone is, I don't have to. It's like the kids in school. They don't have to be respectful anymore. The teacher says, sit in your seat, Tommy. And
Right.
Tommy's like, yeah, fuck you, teacher. I'm going to take a walk.
And can you see why we got here?
Well, I don't see myself having arrived here, is what I guess the issue is for me.
Right.
Like, how did we get here?
Right.
When did it
I
become
think.
acceptable to be heinously disrespectful? And every single thing, shooting people, raping people, beating children, it's all a foundational disrespect for the sanctity of life.
Well, okay, okay. I think you're conflating things here a little bit. 'Cause
Oh, right. Well, explain that to me.
No, I mean, so Trump's appeal and that whole political correctness thing, I think, is a huge mistake. Like
Yeah,
the fact
I
that
don't believe in political
the
correctness.
fact
I
that we
believe
can't
in
say we're not,
authenticity.
like the fact that like illegal immigrants is a loaded term now that you can't say. And like, how do you describe people as like African Americans, black people, colored people? Like, what is the
How
term
about
these
they're
days?
Americans?
Exactly, right. So Larry Elder, I saw, who's black radio host, made this point. He's like, when people call me African American, I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? I'm American. I've never been to Africa. Like, what? I'm black. You can talk about me being black. That's that's obvious. But why would I be African American? It's really, and then like, if you want to say African American about something, then that implies that you have to know that they're not Caribbean. or from from some other part of the world where that where their blackness comes from or whatever.
Yeah, they're not
Like it's
Jamaican Americans or Haitian Americans, they're African Americans.
yeah, well, like it's madness. So anyway, so my point is just that this culture of not really being outspoken, and again, like we don't see Hillary in the same way. I definitely see her as someone that I don't really believe that she means a word that she says. I think I see her as being very manipulating and very calculated in her expressions generally. And that whole culture is just, I think a lot of people are fed up with that, and they're like, this is not helpful.
Well, and what I see,
And then it overcorrects, right? And you can be
yeah.
absolutely certain that the next president that we're going to get after Trump is going to be the opposite. He's not. Well, you're not going to get another Trump. That's not.
Well,
That's not how
from
it
your
works.
lips to God's ears, baby. I
No,
am right
but
with
if
you.
you look at it, we are always flip flopping, right? So
Well,
we get.
it's like that pendulum, you know. I feel like we've been held up here. Like what I have really had to look at in myself is this delusion I had that the world was moving forward into peace and love and light.
Hmm.
And what was happening was maybe the liberals were aspiring to peace, love, and light. And I only had to look at that piece. I
Hmm.
didn't have to, I have this sort of split vision because what I know is that
Did you
there
say
is
truth and love and light? Is that what you said?
truth. Say that again.
Did you say truth and love and light?
Yeah.
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 All right.
Yeah. And
I don't see the liberals as being committed to truth and love and light, actually.
well, I don't think that the liberals might be committed to truth and love and light. I think that when you take a label and define it and then try to attach it to people, here I am with my battery running down here. I thought I was plugged in. But when you take a whole group of diverse, unique people and then you put them into a circumstance where they are not all the same, but we call them liberals. And if liberal means something, then they have to. I'm sorry about this. I apologize. I lost my plug. Hang on. Oh, here it is. So you take these people and they all have a similar way of looking at the world.
Hmm.
And then we name them something. They're liberals.
Hmm.
So, I could call you a liberal, right? I could say, oh, Calvin's liberal. And if that means to me that you agree with me on all my points, and then you tell me if you were a citizen of this country, you would have voted for Donald Trump, that suddenly crushes my platform, right? If I'm somebody who needs you to agree with me in order for me to be right, then I have to attack you and make you wrong so that I can be right.
Yeah.
And then that's why people are best friends, like Steve Bannon and Trump were best friends, and then something happened and they weren't on the same team anymore. And there's no room for, all of this not individuation. We went from my parents and grandparents saying, no, we're not teaching our kids another language. We're here in America. We're American, to we're right and they're wrong, or we're white and they're black, or we're legal and they're illegal. Like, we have to somehow make these into separate categories and rubber stamp people, cookie cutter them. Like, I'm a liberal and you are conservative and we don't see eye to eye. Well, that's what is unfolding in me with people that I deeply love who voted for the man who's in office right now. That, I bet you if I sat down with him, had a conversation with him, I would be able to find light in there. I would be able to find common ground. We're all common. And that's maybe what this is all about. Like all this bullshit about us all being different. And the thing that makes us the same is that we're all different and unique. That's the only thing that makes us the same. And that we're all humans, And what do you think about, I'm going to ask you about this.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. What do you want to ask?
I was going to ask you about this new world order and one world government concept that people are sort of talking about. Some
I think
people
it's
talk.
awful.
Yeah, I think it's awful too.
I I hate it. It sounds authoritarian to me. It's like
Yeah.
let each country decide for itself how it wants to govern and what it wants to do. I don't
Yeah,
like
but
that
I
idea.
think that it's about control, that one world government. I think, but
Yeah. So I was thinking before when you said like one of the things that I don't understand about this country is that we've allowed we've allowed ourselves to not have a shared language.
yeah,
There's English and Spanish. I'm like, no. I mean, it's great that a lot of people know how to speak Spanish. That's fantastic. But let's insist that our common language here is going to be English, and people have to learn it.
yeah.
Um,
And my friend, her partner was a Spanish and American English citizen, American citizen, and she lived in Holland. And when my friend went to Holland, she spent a year in an immersion program. You cannot become a Dutch citizen unless you speak Dutch.
mm,
Like, and they put her in an immersion program where she spent an entire year learning the language, like total immersion. And she spent a year in a driver's program, like this woman who came there with a driver's license. Like, they put these sort of foundational things in. Okay, come to Holland, be a citizen.
mhm.
Here's the criteria you have to meet. And if you don't
Exactly.
meet it, we're not rejecting you. You are not meeting our criteria.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it's not personal anymore. It doesn't
Exactly.
matter what color you are. You just have to be able to speak Dutch
Right.
and show a willingness to want to be a part of the country.
Yes, I'm so with you. I think that's something that we haven't done a very good job of
Yeah.
in this country or in in where I'm from. And I mean Denmark has done a lot on this actually. One of the more forward countries when it comes to this kind of thing. But yeah, the language and also culture and values. Like we value free speech, we value democracy, we value conversation, and the whole like thing about people now. Canada passed a law like I think about 6 months ago where that literally says that every citizen that you have a right to not be offended, and if you happen to feel offended about something I say, I am now the criminal. So everybody has a right to basically say, "Oh, wait, I have felt offended by that, so now whoever said that is a criminal." I think that's madness.
Well, it is total madness because if I'm gay and you're straight and you're offended by my saying I'm gay, then I'm a criminal for being an individual,
Yeah, there you go.
right? I mean,
That's a
it's
very good point. Yeah,
micromanaging, huh?
yeah, it's a very good example. I love that example. It's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, because now I'm a criminal because you don't agree with me. You might be offended by me. To me, offensive things are, I'm not offended by much. I'm offended by the brutalizing of innocence. That's why I got all hot about those kids because I'm like, these poor kids.
Hmm.
They were in a school into which somebody with one of their peers, age-wise, walked in with an assault rifle and mowed down 17 of their closest friends, and they're speaking out about it, and we're going to tell them to shut up.
No, no, we're
Like
not.
well, that's what they're being told. They're being minimized and dehumanized, and they
I
are
know.
being,
I have to say I haven't seen that at all. But I've seen them being put on a pedestal and put on a
well,
podium and being.
that's being minimized and dehumanized as well, because they should be able to speak their experience without being minimized or dismissed,
Hmm.
but they shouldn't have to make the rules. That's what adults are supposed to do, and
Yeah.
that's where the adults have to listen to the child's fear, and make a plan to keep that from ever happening again,
Hmm.
because our rights under the Constitution are life, liberty, and the pursuit of and life, liberty, and property. Like, a state cannot create a law that keeps me from feeling safe. That's pretty basically, and children cannot.
Wait. A state cannot pass a law that keeps me from feeling safe.
The state cannot pass a law that deprives me of my right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of
Gotcha.
happiness. Right? So my rights cannot be denied at the state level
Hmm.
because the federal government provides for my attendance to me as an individual citizen who has a right. And that doesn't just say adults at 21 or 18 who get to vote. That's every citizen. So if our children are citizens of the United States, but are not in a situation where they are capable of making laws and voting, but they have an intrinsic right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then it's my job as an adult and your job and the job of all the adults in the world to protect the rights of those children who are citizens of the United States.
Absolutely. We've completely failed them. I don't think anybody disagrees on that, right? Like
Yes,
everybody.
we completely failed them. But the way back in, I only heard a piece of that woman's speech. Energetically, you can call me a wussy. I mean, I know people who would tell me, watch the news, like, what are you, don't bury your head in the sand. I can't take it energetically.
Right.
It's like playing punk rock on a Macintosh system at, 1,000 decibels. Here's this fine, beautiful instrument with this enormous cacophony coming through it.
I know, yeah.
And it breaks things, it breaks me. I can't listen to it. But I can't stand there's this pompous ego communication of disrespect in the tone of the people, And
I think
what
everybody's
happened to us? Like Trump is on making fun of that poor guy that journalist who was handicapped. And people are like, oh, you're oversensitive. Like you're too easily offended. No, it offends me.
Right.
It offends me if any person does a thing like that. Like.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I agree on that. And yeah, it's just like you get the complete package, right? Like that's the guy that we got as president. I think very few people. Well, it's interesting. Like I mean, I think it's like there is that oversensitivity, right? There where like now apparently you can't say the R word.
What is the R word?
Retarded, because like that's a word that like in both in Danish and in English was just been using for like, oh, that's lame, that's stupid, whatever. But then like there's this, oh no, but there's actually people who are retarded. It's a specific psychological or psychiatric phenomenon. So if you use that word about something, then it's offensive to them. And I think that's that.
Well, it started off with us using that word. Yeah, I remember being a little kid and have someone say, "Oh, you're a retard."
Right.
No, what we didn't understand as kids was what it was referring to is the heinous judgment of people with different abilities than me.
Right.
And retarded means it's a word. It's not a word about someone's mental status or someone's ability to grow. To retard is to limit.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So people with different abilities than me, it's like someone who they call them idiot savants. They still call them that. Is idiot a nice word?
No.
Is savant a nice word? Probably. But if you put those two words together, it implies that this person is limited in all these other areas, but you stick them in front of a piano and they're playing Mozart without any training.
Right.
Like that's just interesting to me. Like, why would somebody have the capacity to do that? That just makes me curious. It doesn't make me march in a parade saying you can't use the word. I was trained by my mother. Like, you don't call people dummy. You don't call people stupid. Like she was.
No, but I wasn't even talking about using it about people. I was talking about using it about like,
using it at all.
This glass doesn't have an opening where you can put water in it. That's kind of retarded, like just as a word to use. I don't like. And then if people choose to like, that's how that word has been used in my mind for years, and now we have to be like, oh wait, some people feel offended by that, and we have to adjust to that. I'm not sure I understand how that. Like,
well, people feel offended by it. People would not feel offended unless they were foundationally wounded by the connotation that they're being offended by. I was watching a video. I love going on on YouTube and watching some of these videos, and they had this little black kid and this little white kid, these groups of kids, one white, one black, or of color, and they were like, well, what makes Joey different than you? They're asking the 5-year-old. And she's like, well, Joey likes to play kickball, and I like to play with dolls. And Joey doesn't like to play with dolls, so that's what makes Joey different than me. Like, Joey is dark-skinned, rough hair, and the little blonde Swedish-looking kid is saying, Joey's different than me because Joey plays a different game than I play. That's the nature of us. Like, it's natural for children to accept the differences because they're not looking for difference. They're looking for sameness. So the problem with the word, oh, that's retarded. Like, I didn't know you couldn't use that word anymore either. We said it all the time. But I didn't say it to, I had friends who, when I was a kid, we called them retarded. It was what the school called them. They were retarded kids. It was a name. Do we have a better name for them now? I'm not so sure. What I want to know is, what is a dotard? Have you heard that word?
I have. I don't know what it is. No. Do you?
And I think what happens is we kick out the word retarded, and then we'll make up a word that means a similar thing that doesn't sound the same, so we get away with it.
I think what people want is for us to use retarded only for people who have a mental disability and not use it for anything else. I think that's what is.
Well, the word retarded was in our language before we ever applied it to people with mental disability. Just why don't you call them, differently abled? We don't even call people handicapped anymore. We say different.
I think that's weird too.
Well, it's about fixing the thing after the fact rather than fixing the foundational judgment.
Exactly. Yeah.
That caused us to use that word negatively in the first place. Let's blame the word. It's like blame the gun or blame the drug. Blame the word.
Yes. It's not solving the problem. It's
the intention behind the word. And then if I use a different word, that's the thing I was explaining about my dog. Like, my dog didn't care what my words were. He cared what my tone was and what my intention that was transmitted energetically, which is why this, people, that whole, oh, you're offended. I am offended. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but I'm not offended because you choose to use
every right to be offended too. But just because you're offended doesn't mean that people have to stop whatever it is you're feeling offended about.
Well, exactly. And I'm writing a book I've been writing this book for years, but it's called the Unconditional Love, Conditional Relationship. So it's about, if we come from the spiritual premise of our highest aspiration is to love unconditionally, in order to be able to accomplish that, we have to put conditions on the relationship, right? So the unconditionality is a being, and in order for me to love. Oh, where did you go? Did you disappear?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. In order to be able to love you unconditionally, if you're my brother and I love you, but you're an alcoholic and you get drunk and you make a mess, and it makes me conditional about, I love you, but you're driving me crazy.
Right.
So maybe the only way I get to love you truly unconditionally is by saying, Calvin, while you're doing this, I can't be around you.
Yeah.
I love you, but in order for me to love you unconditionally, I can't know that you act this way because you acting that way offends me. So then instead of be offended by you and make you change, I allow you to be who you are. Based on the unconditional love I feel for you, I don't want to hate you. And your behavior produces that kind of distaste in me. So I might have to set proximity to you that says, I love you. This is your choice. I don't agree with it. Don't call me until you're a year clean and sober, you're gainfully employed. Mm-hmm. I might say that to you. Does that mean I don't love you? I've rejected you. I foundationally think you're a bad person. I'm just saying, I can't be unconditional about you if I have to watch you get drunk and beat up your wife. So
you have to take care of yourself.
Well, you have to come from, if we are going to actually aspire to this humane decency in the world, it has to come from a place of, I can understand that, I accept you as a human being who has frailties and who has,
Mm-hmm.
good things about you. This is what I can't do. I cannot be in your presence with that behavior
Mm-hmm.
that you are choosing,
Mm-hmm.
and stay good with me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't want to walk around. I might grieve not seeing you,
Right.
but at least I'll grieve you from a loving place rather than grieve watching you do something heinous, or get a DUI and hurt somebody on the road. Like all of those behaviors, that doesn't mean you're a horrible person because you behave that way.
Yeah.
It
Totally.
means
I'm in pain. I'm hurting. Right.
hey, you're in pain, you're hurting, but you're making a choice that is making the pain worse. And I
Mm-hmm.
can't aid and abet that. I can't be a party to
I'm
that.
100% with you on that. Yeah.
Right. So that's where I feel like, where we're entering into the conversation like, oh, you can't use the word retarded. Well, yeah, what about flame retardant? And you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? The word to retard is to limit,
Right.
to stop from growing.
So in terms of politics, like what I feel like has happened, like the guns and the shooting and all that stuff, right? And what we can do, like as adults, we failed. We need to figure out how to solve this. But like one thing that one thing that I keep seeing is all these people shooting at, not literally but metaphorically shooting at the NRA, and I'm not gonna stand here and say I love the NRA or defend the NRA, but as I understand it, they're not fans of school shootings. They're not
Yeah.
in favor of, and I don't think any NRA member has done any mass shooting. I don't know that they have, but I don't think it's the typical NRA member who will go out and do some kind of mass shooting. I don't get that impression.
No, it's the organization, is it functions as it functions. It's the intention of why do we have the NRA in place? Do we have the NRA in place to support people, to teach them, educate them about gun safety, teach them the joys of the sport of this? And then people at the top who say, we can make a boatload of money out of this. Let's just,
My guess is that the I mean, it's a lobbying organization, right? So I'm supposing that the NRA is a response to the people who are who want to take away the right to have guns from people, and then the more people say, well, let's take away all the guns, the more people join the NRA and support them because they're like, no, don't take my gun.
yeah. Well, that whole idea of, the guns are benign things.
Mm-hmm.
They have the potential to be used for fun, target shooting,
Mm-hmm.
or to kill.
Yeah. I
But
mean, I would love to see a world where there's. I mean, it's not. I walk around the streets of New York, right, and like nobody that I know, I haven't seen a gun up close in real life for years. It's not something. I mean, yeah, the police officers have their guns by the side, so I guess I have seen, but it's not something that you see anyone kind of carrying a gun around or anything like that. And like I think like going you go to the deli to buy a cup of coffee and some guy is in there buying chips and he's carrying a gun like that. I mean, it does something. It's like, whoa, wait, whoa. Like now, like it kind of changes the equation, right? If we get
yeah,
into a fight right now, like, okay, I'm not the strongest person in the world, but if none of us are armed, then that's like one level of like damage, harm that could happen. But now you are carrying a gun. It does change the equation, you know.
yeah. Well, the intention of carrying a gun in public anywhere is the expectation that I am going to have to use it because someone is going to assault me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no other reason to carry a gun in the world.
Show off.
Well, that's about an extension of a body part, right? That show off part.
Probably.
So,
Noses. You're talking noses here.
huh?
You're talking about noses, right? That's the body part you're referring to.
Yes, it was
Yeah.
noses, of
Yeah.
course, or feet. Was it? Isn't it feet? No.
I think so.
Um. So if I'm carrying a gun in public, I either want you to know I'm big and bad, because if you think about the old cowboy movies, the sheriff walks into town, he's got his big star on him and he's got a gun, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe two of them. And that's about projecting a persona.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, I don't even have to pull my gun, because if you know I have it, you're not going to screw with me, right? It's a way of projecting a symbol, just like we were talking about letters and words as symbols. It's symbolic. So if you got somebody who's walking around with a gun, that makes me nervous, because I don't know that person. Like a cop with a gun is supposed to have a gun.
Mm-hmm.
I can assume from that they've been trained, that they entered for the right reasons into as public servants, and with, so they're safe to carry a gun. I don't have to be afraid if they carry a gun. But some random guy with a gun, I don't know anything about him.
Mm-hmm.
I know that he could walk into a gun shop and buy a gun with no background check, and he might be, psycho buddy, who went in there and now he's flaunting his gun, and pretty soon we're all going to be on the floor on our bellies praying for our lives. And so there's something about that, and that concealed carry, the concealed carry, I get it. People want to have a gun on them, but I work with energy, and I talk to people all the time about expectation. Like, if I am carrying a gun, either I'm just a little left of center, and my gun is like, it's like wearing a diamond ring for me. I'm so in love with my gun, I have to show it to everybody because I'm in love with this object for some reason. Or I want to use it, or I think I have a right to use it. Like, there's so many implications from carrying a gun around in public.
Well, it can be like, women, like the, again, Me Too movement and all that stuff, right? Women carrying a gun in their purse in case they get assaulted by someone.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. It's like, I taught self-defense. I learned self-defense from a martial arts master.
Mm-hmm.
And, my martial arts master wasn't a big fan of like mace or pepper spray. Like, I was taught without any weapon at all how to disarm somebody with a gun in my face, how to disarm somebody with a rifle, how to disarm somebody with a knife. Like, there's a way to do that.
To learn.
It's a great thing to learn. But, the premise sort of that is weapons are used to assault. Like, there's no other reason for a weapon except to assault someone. And even if I'm defending myself, that's where that idea of, are we feeling offended, kind of comes into scary scrutiny. Because why can I shoot you? If you're assaulting me, or if I just think you're being offensive to me,
mm-hmm.
Like, that's the whole idea of mental health. Mm-hmm. Like, a person who's delusional is feeling deeply offended.
Mm-hmm.
Is that real?
And being told that he has a right to feel offended, right? Because that's the culture now, it seems.
Well, maybe that is become the culture. He has a right to feel offended. And what we're saying by saying you can carry a gun is that if you feel offended and you have a right to that, you also have a right to counter yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
So somebody who doesn't have the mental wherewithal to have common sense about that is going to shoot you in the face if you've offended them. And you might even not know you've offended them. And if you have a turban on your head, or you're dressed in a different way, and I see that as offensive, well, where does it stop?
No, yeah. I think so. My country was a country that did these Muhammad cartoons back some 20 years ago or something like that, right? No, not that long ago. 10? I think. But you remember those cartoons, right?
I don't think so.
Oh, there was like they were saying, well, you can't depict the Prophet Muhammad, and we live in a country that has free speech, and that's violating free speech, right? So let's commission 20 cartoonists to draw just like pictures of Muhammad, like cartoon pictures, right? And it became a big thing, and there was like flags being burned, and pretty much all Western governments got involved in appeasing Muslims who felt offended about this. And I'm like, guys, you missed the mark on this one. Like, we can't let this one we can't let this one go and just say, oh, we shouldn't have published this, because that is a right that to publish these things. And if people want to feel so offended that they burn shit down over it, that's on them. That's not on us.
Well, and if you dig down into that a little bit, they have every right to their freedom of speech. The the challenge there is it was the intention of the people who drew the Muhammad cartoons to stick it in the face of the people
No.
who said that you can't. Yeah, why would they
Well,
do
no,
a thing
okay,
like
yes.
that?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't let you finish your sentence. You were
Yeah, they
yeah.
did. Why would they do a thing like that if it
No.
wasn't to say, yeah, fuck you, I'm not doing that?
So it wasn't to stick it in the face of Muslims. It was to point out that there is this self censorship going on, where there are things that you just can't say and can't print, even though you believe it's true, and that's what they wanted to draw attention to, and
Right. Even
say,
though you believe it's true. So why Muhammad? Like, what did Muhammad do to be believed or disbelieved? Like, it was an undercurrent of it's an adolescent position. You say black, I say white.
I can see
You're going to
that.
hold that offended position because if they cared about the people who were feeling offended, if you just had common decency, you know, if
I think that
and you
I think
go
the
ahead.
underlying thing is like a country like Denmark has had a lot of immigration, and a lot of Muslim immigration, and a lot of people who don't share the same values that the rest of the country uh, do, and that's okay. That's a choice that you can make, to say, well, we're going to take people in who have different values, but I think it's something that's worth being talked about, and it wasn't being talked about.
Well, and when you say values, I like to make, different customs or different values. To me, values and morals are very similar things.
Right.
And I think maybe that's what needs to be the filter for immigration. You know, when I think about, you
I
know,
don't care about customs. I care about values.
yes, their customs are how they dress, how they look, what they eat, what their culture gave them in terms of their rituals. But who a person is, that's this whole thing like, oh,
Well,
all
yeah,
Muslims are bad. Muslims
right.
aren't bad.
Muslims are great. There's nothing.
Muslims are people, and there are Christians, there are all kinds of people who happen to be raised in a certain religion who choose to be heinous in the world, or who behave in ways that represent an entire culture. That's what we do. I don't know what it is in the human being that wants to be certain. We talked about this maybe last week about I don't know. Like, I have to be 100% certain, so I have to be right and you're wrong. So, little kids don't have that. That's what I was talking about with that video. Like, why is Charlie different than you? Well, Charlie likes to play a different game than I like. And that's really how Charlie's different than her. She didn't say, well, Charlie's black and I'm white, and Charlie's, has money and I don't, or
Right.
like those are adult overlays. So what we're doing, which is creating this nightmare in our world, is at the behest of how we raise our children. And, I remember my nephew when he was little. I, lived in Provincetown, and here was my nephew with this, had some influence from a person in a fathering position who was sort of bigoted and racist and not like me. So my poor nephew came to Provincetown, and we're walking down the street, and girls are holding hands with girls, and boys are holding hands with boys, and boys are dressed like girls, and girls are dressed like boys. And poor Chris, he's like, look, we had a story where we were walking up the street. This poor little kid, my thing was, Chris, if they're bothering you, then they don't have a right to bother you. But if they're not bothering anybody and they're doing whatever they want to do on their own, you do not, you're not in danger from that. You're in danger from somebody trying to inflict something on you.
Mm-hmm.
So my nephew's 100% certain, this little 6-year-old on my shoulder. We're walking up the street. It was after the fireworks in Provincetown. Walking up the street, and right in front of us is a drag queen who, the Coppertone kid that pulled up one of the, you might not know this because it was an ad, but Coppertone tanning lotion. They had the kid's butt, one side of the butt revealed to show that his leg was tan and his butt wasn't tan. That was covered up kind of thing. So here's this drag queen, high heels, bathing suit, one butt cheek revealed, full makeup, no wig. So I feel my nephew on my shoulders tense up a little bit. And he knew not to say to Aunt Debbie, this is just doesn't look right, Aunt Debbie, this is wrong. And so he was a little tense, and my sister was with me, and she sort of sensed him. She's like, let's go around this nice. And the little drag queen was like, hi, how you doing? Hi, sweetheart, waving at Chris. And Chris is like, hi. So we go around, and Chris is silent. And Chris was never silent when he was a kid. He was Mr. Chatty. We're walking up the street, and up the street, we used to call them the rent-a-cops, because in the summertime, in Provincetown, it goes from 3,300 people to 33,000 people, like over the summer. So they get police officers from other places who will come and actually do that detail for a period of time. So up the street is walking an older, like middle-aged male police officer and a younger female police officer. And Chris, I feel him. He goes, excuse me, Mr. Policeman? and we all stop dead, right? We see my friend Rafe is over here sitting on the ground. We all stop. And he goes, there's a man back there with a lady bathing suit on and some high heel shoes? That's just not right. So the poor cop didn't know what to say. Like the light and amusement in their faces. He goes, really, Sonny? Here in Provincetown? Yeah, right back there. He's going to be walking up here in just a minute.
That's hilarious.
But it was this innocent thing. But even at 6 years old, he had gotten what is right and wrong from a culture that was, in my opinion, bigoted and you might call radicalized in that way. And what he had from me was, you accept people exactly who they are. It's not about what they look like. It's about who they are and how they're willing to be kind in the world.
Right.
So
on that note, Deb Mangelus, let's call it a day.
Oh, it's a day.
Okay. It's a day. Yeah.
Is it 10:30 already?
It's 10:37.
Yeah, we just go on and on and on.
I know, but let's pick this up next week.
Right.
Same
I
time.
love that I get to meet you every Tuesday.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
An hour and a half goes by like that.
Me too. Actually, let me just check. Yeah, next week is great.
Is it snowing where you are?
Yes, it is. Do you want to see if I can see? Let's see here.
Oh yeah, there's the city in the snow. Beautiful.
There's a little bit of snow, yeah.
That's a great view out there, huh?
Oh yeah. Oh, you should see the living room. It's insane.
I will see the living room soon. I will make my way down to you. And
that is fantastic.
So what are you going to make me for dinner? It's going to take a little thought.
Something Sicilian.
No, you don't have to cook me anything. Cook me whatever you want to cook. You don't have to.
I love cooking. I would love to cook for you.
I would love to have you cook for me. All right, honey. I love you. And squeeze Nomi and Yasmin for me. And I'll see you next Tuesday.
Yeah, see you Tuesday.
All right. Bye, honey.
Bye.